right, so welcome back to another episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we will be reviewing it's kind of a cult classic film. It's Schenectady, New York. It's a 2008 postmodern drama that was directed by Charlie Kaufman, and it was his directorial debut. It's very interesting. We've seen a couple films that were written by and directed by Kaufman before. Sorry, I believe I said Hoffman earlier. I meant Charlie Kaufman. And yeah, he has a very interesting style within writing and directing. And I'm also a huge fan of Philip Seymour Hoffman, who also stars in this film. So yeah, anyway, I just kind of wanted to get your initial thoughts, Chris. What did you think?
Well,
I know this is a very dense, very broad, very wild film.
It's going to be impossible for us to do what we. I mean, I prefer this style anyways, where we jump around the movie.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of jumping around, just an FYI, because this film is all over the place.
I actually prefer that when we do those kind of episodes,
Sure.
because I found that when I'm editing, like when it's kind of we go through the plot too linearly, it's like I can see it gets monotonous. But I will say that this is a film that, like, when I watched like the last 15 minutes, like, I was impacted emotionally, and everybody. Now we do have listeners, I guess. I will say that, like, as you can tell, other episodes, like, I usually like dislike what I call like emotional porn, and like, that kind of like, just try to get your, teary eyed. But this movie I found to be like pretty profound and like and on an emotional level that I wasn't expecting. So I'll start with that. But also, like, this film is as imperfect as it was, because I think I've mentioned to you, like, the first half I was kind of like, what's going on? I found this film to really like reflect in many ways, like kind of like the anxiety of being an individual. I think when I say the modern era, I mean, like, in America in many ways, and we'll dig into that. But yeah, I find Kaufman's works, we saw like movies that he's written, and he likes to like really explore and he tinkers with themes that I think a lot of writers don't touch or don't think about. Like, I've seen a couple interviews with him where he's a bit socially awkward, so I can see that he's really thought about some of these things deeply. But yes, like you mentioned, Philip Seymour Hoffman, like, his performance was really good in this film. So I feel like it was like a meshing. Like, I think this movie worked, in my opinion, because it had like good cast who probably did some pushing back, because as you know, like, people, when they work on movies, unless the director is like a real dictator, which sometimes they are, they take feedback from actors and other input. So I feel like here, I suspect that he probably had some input into, like, his character, how he wanted to portray him. And like, yeah, there's some powerful scenes that we'll get into, but yeah, I thought the movie was like, I was surprised. So basically, to answer your question, I was like, the feelings I had for the first 30 minutes and the last 20 to 30 minutes were like 180. Like, I went from like, man, is this going to be like a bit of a slog, like the other one we saw that's more recent? What's it called? Like, what was it called?
I know what
I'm thinking of Ending Things, right?
Yeah.
So we had seen that one before, and I was a bit concerned that like it was going to be like that again, where I'm going to be really like confused. But no, like, this film, I haven't seen his whole filmography, but I consider it like his best work that he's directed.
Well, in terms of directing,
yeah, the writing, I would say, being John Malkovich, was far superior.
It was a great film, way ahead of its time for that movie. Yeah, what I will say, and just as to preface this, we definitely did not capture like everything I think that was trying to come across in this film. There's a lot that's sort of open for interpretation, and I've only seen this film once, so I feel like if I went and saw it 2, 3, even 4 times, you'll get a little more out of it kind of each time. It's just one of those films, and I think that's kind of what Kaufman was going for as well. Right? There were a lot of very interesting themes that I saw. Specifically, I kind of wanted to touch upon, because I thought it was interesting because it was so in your face. What did you think that was represented by the burning house? Because, I mean, that was just so in your face that within the metaphor that it was kind of hard to avoid.
Yeah, it's like, it's a motif, right? Like, I mean,
how Kaufman was going for there?
I think what he was going for there is like kind of like, this is the movie. I think this movie in many ways is a lot of motifs and metaphors. I think if I remember correctly, so one of the characters is Hazel, who her backstory is like she has the infatuation with Philip Seymour's character, what's his name again?
Caden.
Yeah, Caden. And so like the backdrop is that like she's been so this is how complicated it's going to be. So Caden is having issues with his marriage at the time, which we'll get into. But Hazel's like really into Caden, right? Because she's at the time, right? She's over idealizing that this guy is like a visionary director, the mind of an artist, the savant, you know. And I believe like if I remember correctly, like she says like there's a line where she says like I'm one of my biggest fears is like dying in a fire, right?
And yet she chooses to buy that house and live in it, knowing that it might kill her.
Yeah, knowing that it might kill her because the house is like made out of like wood, right, or something like that. Like, yeah. So my read on it, and like I said, I'm a like I say armchair philosopher, is that you know this is why I like this movie so much. You know, often the choices we make, even if they're kind of subconscious in many ways, kind of like they're tied to our deeper like. You know, this goes back to like Jung and Freud, right? Like it's tied to our subconscious. And also I think it touches upon like our self-destructive nature as people. So you know how like I know you and I've discussed in the past, like how we know people that have like self-destructive tendencies, and like they're maybe even some of them are like self-aware enough to know that, but they can't help themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like people who suffer from addictions.
Yeah. And so, I mean, again, like each of these motifs, we can talk probably hours worth. But I will say that's what I got out of it. Like, you know, she had this fear, but she was drawn to it, right? It's kind of like the Pandora's box, right? Like I'm drawn to like that thing that I know I shouldn't.
Yeah, you're drawn to something that's self-destructive. I mean, it's interesting because it really reminds me of the movie Annihilation, because that was the big theme throughout that. But more time that's cancer and how our cells are biologically embedded to sort of self-destruct. But it was really interesting because, yeah, I got the same thing from the burning house. And in the end, Hazel actually dies within the house, if I recall, from all the smoke. So I think what they were also trying to get across is like the decisions you make early on, or the choices that you make, really can resonate and affect you throughout your life, which is clearly evident by that motif. Is there anything else you really wanted to touch upon with that, or like any other? Because there were plenty of motifs throughout this film, and we're going to be bouncing around all over the place.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of motifs, so I don't think we can. Like I said, I'm going through this movie linear, like in a linear fashion.
You really can't, because I'm not even sure it was in a linear fashion.
Yeah, I don't think it was meant to be either. Except for we'll get to it when we talk about the ending. The ending, like tying to the beginning. I have a lot of thoughts on that, and a lot of what's the term, soapboxing I got to do.
Okay.
So what I will say with Hazel is that what I found interesting about her character, because she's really prevalent throughout the film, actually, and we'll get to Adele. I think her name was Adele, the wife in the beginning. But like I said, Hazel, like her character is fascinating to me because she, again, I think she does what a lot of us do when we view celebrities or we view people we admire, or let's say even on a smaller scale who we like maybe romantically, like we over idealize who they are, right? Like, you know, until we get to know them. And then like I think the key thing, like after that point is like, do you still like them after the veil has been pulled, right? Like, you know, until you're like, you know, you're interacting with somebody often and even intimately, you don't really know who they are. And that's not just with like, you know, dating life, but also friends, right? Like you might like somebody initially hanging out, but then once you see enough behavior, you understand who they are and what they're about, right?
Sure.
And I found that interesting too with Hazel because like, the house thing, but you know, she tried, like there was a point where she had her own life, right? Like there was that period, right?
She moved on.
She moved on for a while and then she was sucked back in, right? Which goes back to sometimes we're drawn to the things that are not good for us, right? Or we're drawn to our darker tendencies.
I don't think Caden was, right? He was sort of that pool that pulled her back.
Yeah, exactly.
In a way, Caden was an incredibly selfish character.
Yes. Caden is,
it's very complicated. But yeah,
very complicated. I have again long-winded answers for that, but that's the only thing I want to touch upon Hazel's. That I think, you know, to do service to her character, that like it's not just like, you know, how she died, but her story was interesting, right? Like she was, you know, it to me like stomach turn, because I think we've all been there where we're trying to impress and just be in their orbit, and like Caden's just like, you know, whatever, you know, I'm this savant, I'm the greatest artist of our time.
But then later on, like Caden was always drawn to Hazel. It's very Caden's it's always kind of that idea of you want what you can't have. That's what it seemed like with Caden, because he would go to her house, he would do that. Like he didn't really pay attention to her at first, and then after she kind of moved on, Caden, that was kind of like one of his regrets.
Yes.
Was like not taking Hazel more seriously.
And like you said, like she had a separate life, and she seemed
Very
like
completely separate.
Yeah, she seemed like she was happy. Also, I think what's also I mean, I know she has lots of books. I didn't know most of the books, but the one that stuck out to me, there's a scene where like a book of his name is like Franz Kafka. He's a very interesting philosopher. I haven't really read his works. I just know that like he was more famous because after he died than when he was alive writing. But yeah, like you see a lot of these stuffs in the movie where like it's sprinkled in, and knowing Charlie Kaufman, like it's probably sprinkled in for a reason because that's how his mind works. But yeah, I mean, I'll let you talk about Hazel if you want for a little bit. I just want to, since we're on her character, I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, I don't really know what much more to say there's to say, but I mean, this movie was just so hard because there's probably a lot more that we're just not touching upon, or I didn't get out within like my first viewing. But yeah, her character was kind of tragic because oftentimes we're sort of pulled when we try to move on with life. Sometimes like there are those people or those bad influences really that can pull you back into your tendencies that you should move past. And I think that because Hazel was desperate for a job, she got sucked back into sort of her negative tendency, which was Caden, right? Or negative influence, because it really affected her family life. She lost kind of everything, moved back in with their house, and eventually she got back together with Caden into the burning house, and it ended up killing her. Right? Yeah. She died of smoke inhalation, I believe, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's just interesting because I think that speaks to like sort of a greater context of the human psyche, that we're often drawn to things that we know are bad for us.
Yeah.
That's as much as I'll say about her character anyway. There's just so much psychology within this film too. You can clearly tell that that Kaufman was really influenced by Jung, and sort of because a lot of the characters sort of try to go through this progression of self-awareness, and it was just very Jungian throughout. I don't know if you want to touch upon that more.
No, I mean, there's so much like we could touch upon. What I will promise the audience is that I will be giving my long-winded answers. So, going back a little bit, so there is those scenes that were kind of like they piqued my interest, right? When like what's his name, Caden, like I think he hurts his eye, right, with the water, the sink.
Yeah. That's at the very beginning.
Yeah, and and I bring that up because I want to get us back to the beginning a little bit, like his relationship with his wife at the time, right? Mm-hmm. Like he is like this grandiose, big picture. I am the eye of the world, and his wife is like a
she's an artist as well.
She's an artist as well, but she focused on like she has a like
she wants fame.
Yeah, she wants fame, but she focused on a specific needle, right? Like she does like I think paintings, right? Like she does
something like that.
So she's like really like wants to be like almost like what I could describe like a samurai, like be perfect at one thing and do it really well. While like I think Caden, and we follow his story throughout the film, that he's like he has these grandiose ambitions of his life, right? And of his intellect.
That's even represented by the play he tries to pull off a freaking replica of New York City.
Yeah.
This is just insane. It was too much.
So what I found interesting with and us, I think we forgot to mention it, but if you've been following our podcast, we do spoilers. Yeah. So I mean, she eventually leaves him, right? Because like you said, she wants fame too, and like she also, I think she starts feeling that like life with Caden is like empty. This happens in many marriages, right? After the honeymoon phase, as they say, dies off, right?
Speaking of what we were talking about before the pod, yeah.
Yeah. And so, she leaves him. But like, yeah, you see like this dichotomy. I was interested to get your thoughts on that. Like, he has it's almost like two ways to view the world, right? Like, I want to be good at this niche. Like, let's say I'm a great nuclear physicist. I want to be the best in my niche field, right? Or like what he's doing, right? I want to be this, grandiose.
I mean, he's got kind of the MJ mentality, if you want to put it that way, for a sports analogy, right? MJ was always hyper competitive at everything he did all the time, 24/7, right? Not many people can do that and pull it off well. And I don't think Caden did. And he put that ambition, if you want to call it that, sort of ruined his life in a way. because it made his marriage fall apart. He wasn't paying enough attention to his wife, and he always, yeah, he put his work first, right, over everything else, even his daughter, everything. And that's why I was saying, like, with his character, he's incredibly selfish in almost every aspect that that I viewed, at least through this film. And there was a lot that was sort of read the lines, some things I didn't even see coming, and I think that they wanted the audience to sort of try to pick up. And especially when his comments from his daughter at the end were just, towards the end of the film, were just wild, and I just did not see coming. I think you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, yeah.
But
go ahead.
But yeah, no. So I guess my point is that, yeah, most people try to excel and focus and do really well at one thing, whether it's your job. Caden, I think, wanted to do well at everything else, and very few people can pull that off, if any.
Yeah. Yeah. So what?
Right, and it kind of it made his life sort of fall apart in the end. And I mean, he tried to. That was the other thing. He tried to get everything so freaking perfect that in the end, it just consumed his life, and he never really did anything.
Yeah, perfect in his perspective, right? Because
yeah.
You know,
I mean, even they say at one point, dude, we've been working on this play for 17, 18 years. When are we going to get an audience? It's like, oh, it's not done yet, basically.
Yeah, because it can never be finished because, you know, he's
kind of like you know what he was? He was the Winchester Mystery House.
Yeah.
Throwing a reference back to like our hometown. It was this house that was never finished.
Yeah, it's the never-ending work, right? He's working on this magnum opus the whole movie, right? It's never over. It's never complete. And okay, so we're gonna get into Kane a bit. So this is my interpretation.
Sure.
I think his character to me represents, and I think Kaufman is aware of this. This is why I think he's a genius. He represents, this is the anxiety of the modern man. So Alex is aware of where, you know, the stuff I read and the things I discover, but this is a really good book that I read years ago called The Denial of Death. And that book really gets into deeper of how, like, you know, especially in our modern era, you know, we have this psychology where we behave and act like we're always like leaving, like we're always going to live forever. But you and I both know that's not the case unless there's some like transformative technology, which, you know, the odds of that is, like, let's just be honest, really low. Yeah, it's written by Ernest Becker. I do recommend it to the audience. But it's a really good book about how, like, you know, as like humans have become more advanced with, like, you know, the pleasures of the flesh, as I would say, to use a more biblical reference, how we have become like we no longer value like the old mythologies, and we tend to live basically for ourselves in many ways, like you said, selfishly, because we think that we're never going to die, and therefore we should maximize like our pleasures. And as well, I gotta do my tangent. And as well as like what was I trying to say? As well as like, so the reason I think he's working on his magnum opus all the time is because in a world where you don't really see value in like leaving your genetic legacy, it has to be this grand work that will pass the test of time, right? Because one thing and this is not related to the book, one thing I got out of this movie was that I believe he's so obsessed because in the end, like, he sees it as his way of immortality, right? Like, his immortal project is this piece of work, right? And again, like, I know when we get into ratings, we'll talk about how we felt differently about the movie, but there were so many parts of this movie that it just clicked in my brain. I was just like, this director, I know, like, he's a certain interview style, but I would just love to talk to him for like a whole weekend, because I feel like a lot of the literature I'm reading is right up his alley, and like what he's thinking about the world too. And I think this is just a small community of people who are like on this like little journey. But anyways, I'll let you take the floor. What you think, what Kanan represents and stuff.
I mean, I agree. I also think that I was listening to somebody else, and it made sense, because throughout the film, like, Caden is just not. He's at the point in life where he's starting to get older, and he's not a healthy human being, right? I mean, they basically say he's got cancer. He has trouble urinating. There's a lot of issues with him in health, right? And so I think Caden also represents sort of the idea that, you know, death is within everybody, that, you know, life is sort of finite. And I think that's also why he tries to work on this grandiose film, because he knows he's, you know, there's a finite number of days that he has left, right? And so his marriage is sort of fallen apart at that point. He's like, what is there to sort of live for? and he puts all of his effort and thought into his play. Now he tries to reconcile with his daughter. That's one of the other things, but that sort of falls apart later on. So I think sort of I think he represents many things. I think one that you didn't touch upon is that he represents the inevitability that we will all die as well. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to the ending, but I found that ending to be so profound. But
I was confused by the ending. I'm going to be honest, so I'm curious to hear your interpretation.
Yeah, we'll get there. This movie was if it wasn't for the slow parts in the beginning, I would have given it like masterpiece. But
would it have been better than Burning if it was a little bit better to you?
If you elaborated on like, so basically, and I've talked to you about this, like basically if he added 20 minutes or removed 20 minutes, I think it would have been like, I don't know about better than Burning, but it would have been
pretty close, right?
It would have been the same tier. Yeah. But we'll get there. But yeah, I agree. That's a good point you made about like he does represent like his story represents like the truth that we don't want to face, which is again go back to
that we will all die. I mean, the whole time. I mean, they make so many scenes, so many references that he's sick, that he's dying throughout.
Yeah.
And they're not subtle, right? Even he's like borderline black at one point.
Yeah.
You know he's not healthy.
Exactly. But throughout the movie, right, he acts like he'll always have tomorrow, right?
Oh, so I wanted to ask you a question. Why is it that why did Kaufman want to emphasize that the greater femininity in what was his name, in Caden's character? Because in the beginning it's not, but as the film progresses, he starts to tap in more and more to his feminine side. Why is it that was included within his character?
So I think this goes back to
and why was that important for his character?
Ooh, that's a harder question. The first one is a bit easier, I think, to answer because, as you noted in the beginning, this is my interpretation too. Mm-hmm. So I'm feel free to chime in after I talk. This is a postmodern. It's in the category of postmodern drama or whatever. Postmodernism is like a huge category right now, so that can mean a lot of things. But I think one of the things that like, his character kind of like, like you said, not defines, but is used as a tool in this film, is that we're very multifaceted, right? Like you and I both are like, yeah, maybe we have a lot of similarities because of where we grew up in geography, the religion.
Yeah, but we're also very different in many ways too.
Yeah, so I think with him, it's like Caden's like he has to be extreme to make his point. I think for the director. So I think the reason the femininity is explored, or more of like the non-hyper masculine thing, is because I think a lot of people like I think this is like one of the false archetypes, right? That like men don't have feelings or they always have to be tough, right? Like they're as emotionally vulnerable and
just in different ways.
And also like you gotta remember that this movie was made in what 2007, 2008. Yeah, so this is also a time where gay rights and transgender movement is kind of like making more of the mainstream headway. I mean, you can I'll chime in a little bit here with some.
I believe in California, Prop 8 was coming onto the ballot at that point.
Yeah, and the hard examples, just go to YouTube. Look at Hillary Clinton, like basically say she's like, we need to like basically deny, like not deny, but like we need to see on gay marriage right now. You fast forward that to 2016 when she was running, and it was like, I'm for it, rah rah rah.
Well, yeah, not to mention a decade earlier, they were promoting the Defense of Marriage Act. Her and her husband.
Exactly. So I think it shows you in that time also, seeing a couple interviews with him, I think he's very, I mean, when I say in him, I mean Kaufman. He's very self-aware. He's very receptive, even though he might not always make his points clear. Like it's kind of like his movies, but I could see that he's very receptive. So I think there's also that to play too, what he was seeing in New York, because he's a New Yorker. And so that's also part of the same story. So I think he's, I think you can guess what side he's on, obviously. Sure. But not that, I'm not going to get into that like side thing, but like, yeah, I think that's my interpretation. Now, why was it important? I really can't answer that. I guess he could be able to answer that. I guess my best guess is that in a movie that's all about how,
so I guess what was the point of the story in a way then? So
to me, the point of the story,
I mean, there are many. The story, there's not just one interpretation for that, right? But go ahead.
The one that I like the most is, I think I sent you this video, and you can find it on YouTube, where meme is the DNA of our modern society. And I think he was ahead of his time. I think we see this now more with Wall Street bets and crypto. And
Was he ahead of his time, or was he not? I would argue there's many people that were far more ahead of the time than Kaufman.
I mean, for a guy that's able to make a.
You're talking about in directing and film, right?
In film, yeah.
Okay.
In
yeah,
film.
I mean, I totally agree with you. After I saw Being John Malkovich, I was like, this guy is way ahead of his time.
Yeah, so I meant more in cinema. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
obviously
so,
there's writers and other poets.
Philosophy and psychology. I was like, yeah, he's not ahead of his time.
Like I would argue that Ernest Becker here, the book I cited earlier, is, he wrote that book in the 70s, and I remember reading that going like, wow, this is so relevant.
Jung was in the 50s. I mean, yeah,
exactly. So I meant more with cinema. I was gonna say, so going back to like I think a video you all can look up, or this like, or you can look it up on, I think, on like the meme dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, like, our modern society has become, and actually this whole idea actually comes from Richard Dawkins in his famous book, The Selfish Gene, where he talks about how, like, just like there's genes that we use to, like, self-select, our society and culture also self-selects the best ideas, or not best ideas, sorry, ideas. I shouldn't say best, because sometimes they're bad ideas. But basically, we pass on our narrative and stories because we have, there's a lot of narratives and stories out there, right? And so we have to choose which one we want to pass on to the next generation. It's like the mythology, right? This goes back to the ancient Greeks, to whatever civilization, right? Like, we can write so much, but like, even when you read history, there's that adage, right, from Napoleon, right? History is written by the victors. So like, we have to keep teaching ourselves these, like, archetypes and mythology, so that we can continue, our societies. And this is very obvious when you read the book. I've read it too, The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. And so I think this movie is about how, like, because you see this a lot often, right? Especially when we get to that scene where, like, everybody's a slight clone of each other, where basically ideas are basically like simulations, and they overlap, they intersect, and out of that becomes this metamorphosis of, like, our world, right? And I think one of the points in the film that he was trying to explore and dig deeper is that in a world where we've already discarded kind of like the traditional, like Christian narrative, or like that traditional, like, the old way. When I say old way, I mean, like, from the Middle Ages, from like, 2000 years ago. What does that mean for the individual? What does that mean for the society? I think he focused more on the individual, but yeah, what does that mean for relationships? For how do you see the world? Because we see the world mainly through Caden's eyes, and it's not a great place, right? Like, often he's like, he has anxiety, he's depressed, he's neurotic. And actually, one thing I wanted to jump in, like, after my long rant here, is like, there's a lot of interesting scenes that deal with intimacy and sex that I thought would be interesting to dive deeper into. But I want you to get the floor on your answer there before we get
Sure.
into that.
Well, I will say, like, going back to the part about, I guess, Caden embracing or exploring his more feminine side. So I brought up quite a few times. I've read some Jung. I am by no means an expert of him, but I think a big part of the film was just about Caden sort of going through the process and journey of, like, self-awareness, or accepting his self, right? And I can't remember all of the stages, but there's sort of 4 stages within Jungian psychology for self-awareness, right? And one of them is sort of embracing all the parts of you, or acknowledging them. And like we were talking about, or you brought up earlier, we all have varying degree, or we're multifaceted, right? Just people in general. And so you have varying degrees. You're not all 100% masculine, nor are you typically all 100% feminine. You have varying degrees. And so I think that within Caden trying to explore that aspect of him, it was sort of embracing all aspects of himself. And so that's why. And that eventually sort of leads him to sort of this journey of self-awareness where, you accept the ego and the self, right? And at the end, Caden sort of does, and he kind of realizes not only him within himself, but also where he has sort of come within his life, and that he hasn't been able to achieve all that he sort of wanted. And so a lot of the sort of, one of the key themes, I think, was this idea of sort of self-awareness.
I can agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so what did you said you wanted to get into more of the scenes of intimacy?
Yeah, so I think I can't remember all of
Which
them.
specifically? Because there was a lot. This film was
There's a
wild.
yeah, there was a lot, but like that's why I see it as a general bucket, right? So there's the
Okay,
one where he's trying to be intimate with Hazel. There's the one where he's intimate with I think
which
it's
is
like one,
weird.
which is one of the. There's like multiple, right? He's trying to be intimate with was it one of the actresses?
The actress, yeah,
Yeah, there's multiple scenes here, but
the
I think
actress
there.
that played Hazel.
Yeah, there's multiple scenes.
That brings up another point I'll eventually want to get into. But okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but I say like I wanted to talk about it as a topic because there's multiple scenes that I think they kind of tie together, right? Like each time is very, it's almost like sad, but also like he has all this like nervousness. Like I'm just curious because like to me I didn't have a full answer because like, this is like I'm trying to get up my reading on this on like the sex psychology. There's only one book I think I've read about like the psychology of sex, which is called this Sex at Dawn, I think, of Dawn or something. It's a famous
Okay.
book as well. But it's something I was interested in picking your brain because I had my own like feelings, but I just feel like they were gut reactions versus like anything like philosophical.
So in terms of like, what exactly are you asking? Like, why did they film these scenes in a specific way, or like, I guess get them a little more because that's very broad. Get a little more.
Yeah, I would say like, why do you think he placed them there? And follow up is when I say he, I mean the director. And follow up is like, what do you think they represented to the character Caden? Like, what was it trying to tell us as a viewer?
Well, a lot of the scenes were kind of awkward, I would say. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I think they might be trying to touch upon how Caden sort of struggles with intimacy at times, right? And I think that's probably why part of the reason why his marriage sort of fell apart as well. And like he even has trouble getting it up, I believe, in one scene with Hazel, right? And he's like, "It's not you," and so a lot of that was just awkward. And so I think that's sort of the more literal physical definition, but I think he just struggles with sort of intimacy and dealing with others. I don't know if that's where Kaufman was going, but that's kind of what I got out of it. I don't know if you got anything else out of it.
Yeah, it left me kind of confused because that's what first came through my head, that like it's a show that he has struggles with intimacy and but my mind was racing deeper because like what I kept thinking going back to was maybe what Kaufman is trying to tell us is that in a society that is so like jaded and so nihilistic, maybe it can only replicate. It can't truly reproduce. And I mean by
what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, I want to get into that. So when I mean by replicate, I mean like can only copy variations of an idea. And so like when you see like I see this a lot with reboots, right? It's like basically it's the same movie but basically slightly different. When I see reproduce, I mean like genuinely new ideas and like something that has not existed before. And I think his lack of impotence at times is because he can't, like, even though he had a daughter, like basically I think one of the messages is that like he can't really live a legitimate legacy. And we'll get to the scene with the daughter later, but and so
it's one of the most powerful wild scenes of the film.
Yeah, and so I think that his inability to be intimate is representative of our society's like I haven't read this book. It's on my reading list. It's called like Bowling Alone, and it's about how like we're becoming more and more like isolationists in our societies. We don't go to clubs.
Social media has kind of like impacted that as well.
Yeah, and this is before, like, this was made before social media grew really big. But yes,
I mean it was just before you get to your point, I'm trying to think. Around that time, I mean, MySpace was probably the biggest thing, and Facebook was really taking off.
Exactly. Before we're in the modern era with OnlyFans. But
no Instagram at that point either.
Exactly. And I think like when you legit create something new, like a legacy or something like, to pass on, I think like the fact that he, like you said, he was kind of impotent two ways, right? I think that's the thing I think Kaufman was getting at, is that you could be impotent physically, but it's very much tied to.
You can be impotent also like emotionally.
Emotionally, I think that's what's affecting him the whole way, right? It's tied together, even though we think it's separate, right? Or we think that like the body is separate than the chemicals that fire in our brains,
Here we go with your Jungian psychology back at it again.
Yeah, dude. I have to read more of him. I just have this long reading list, but like I can't.
I mean, if you like Joseph Campbell, you got to go read Jung.
Yeah, I like Joseph Campbell too. But yeah, that's where I was going. It's just that to me, it just seemed like I was nimbling. I was not really sure. I just feel like this is clearly my interpretation only. So.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, you're probably headed in the right direction with that. Like I could see it. I just because a lot of this is not only how it affects itself, but it's greater commentary on society. Really, that's pretty much where the film was going. I just like within Caden's character himself, I was trying to like see like, oh, okay, you're clearly trying to say that he is. It's very hard for him to connect sort of emotionally, right? And so that sort of translates into his physical interactions as well. But yeah, anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, so going beyond, why is it that within the film, it's sort of a play within a play, right? Which is kind of interesting. What do you think that was supposed to represent, or why do they choose to have that as the backdrop? Are we sort of just acting throughout our lives, or was there something else that Kaufman was trying to get across?
I think this is again my interpretation.
I mean, this can get really like meta as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is right up my wheelhouse.
Go ahead.
So
are we really? Is he trying to say we're not really living? We're just sort of acting throughout our lives?
I think it's partially that. I think it's a mix of Descartes, right? I think therefore I am. So therefore, like, am I in a dream or am I not in a dream, right? But also, I think there's a mix of, again, postmodernism of the 80s where you're also simulating what you see, right? I know I've discussed this with you before that like people, and we've seen this in the modern era, where like when they see Instagram, they see pornography, they simulate that in the real life because they think that's real, even if it's subconscious, even if they say like, oh, this is fake.
You don't really see the fakeness of it.
Yeah.
You think that that's how life is supposed to be.
Yeah, and there's that famous scene with the funeral where everybody's kind of like,
that big monologue.
Basically, it's like, what's the term? Like a monologue, but like, like the scene is set up where it seems like everything's like a multiverse, right? It's like a variation, right? But I don't know if he was going with multiverse, but definitely I think there's some Descartes there where like, is it a dream? Is it not a dream? Or if it is a dream, can that dream still have meaning? And maybe that dream has a dream, like a bit of Inception type of thing. And I think he was like digging deeper into how, I haven't read too much Seneca, but he is one of my favorite Stoic philosophers. And he often says that, not often, I think there's one line he says that like we often suffer more in our imaginations than in reality, right? We have like, in our day-to-day, we don't realize our lives are, this is my interpretation of Seneca, by the way, don't crucify me in the comments. We don't like, we live day-to-day lives. And honestly, if we're really honest, they're mostly monotonous, right? Like we'll watch a show, we'll eat, we'll do a pod, but like, we're not living this heroic, like, yeah, I'm there, 1944 Algeria fighting, a war every day. Right. And I think like, when we have like these issues with anxiety or just, nervousness or whatever, it's often in our head, right? Like, oh, I'm nervous about the presentation because it's going to go bad. I'm nervous to talk to the CEO because I'm intimidated. I'm nervous to ask the girl out because I don't know what your
response is or how they're feeling.
Yeah, I'm nervous to go on this trip because I don't know if I'm going to get stopped at like, the border or something, even though I'm like legal, right? Our mind can go deep into these places, sometimes these darker places that many of us either ignore or explore too much.
Well, I think that's just a survival mechanism.
Yeah. And so I have this long-winded answer to what was your question? Oh yeah, the scene.
But why did they choose to have the backdrop be a play within a play?
So go for a circle here. I think it's because it connects to one of my point, basically saying that like I think art, especially plays and movies, I think it's easy to explore these ideas of fictional reality juxtaposed to the meme effect, right? Like when we watch films, even if it's like, we know it's like artistically, there's some creativity or some nuance they have to do to show us a story, right? We often leave movies going like, oh, wow, that was interesting. That was a good period piece of like, because if you think about it, let's go to like Amores Perros, right? Like it's a great movie, but you could still argue that it's still the interpretation of one director's mind of what Mexico was during that time period, even though it's based on reality.
No, I'm not so sure about that because he's specifically saying it's a slice.
Yes, but even if it's a slice, but it goes back to my point. That's why I think Kaufman's so good. Even if it's a slice, it's still coming out of somebody's mind, right?
Sure.
It's still coming out of somebody's mind, right? It's not like he filmed and said, here's a camera. I'm not going to do anything. We're just going to watch like what happens for 2 days, right? It's still a story, right?
Well, you don't have a cohesive story if you do that.
I know, but what I'm saying is I think that's what Kaufman's getting at, is that like in the end, we create stories in our minds. Even the stories we like, it's still a story. And so we're like obviously some stories have more basis in reality than others, but it's still a story. And I think that's what blew my mind. I'm like, this movie is amazing, guys. If you watch it like 50 times, please. I mean, you could go down this rabbit hole forever. I love going down the rabbit hole. So
You get stuck there, and then all of a sudden you're down and you can't get out.
well, when I get to that point,
what was I also going to say? Anyway, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I also think he is saying that we're in a way that we're kind of like most people are just acting rather than actually living, right?
Oh, that's so true, though. That's so true as well. Yeah, right. We're acting our part often, right? At work. Like if we could think about a world where they told you, Alexis, that like you could do whatever you want, there's no consequences at all. Like, what would you do? I mean, that's the ultimate question.
That would be good, but I think it'd be utter chaos if that went to that. If you went to that direction, because there'd be no restraint. But anyway, I digress. So my other question that I wanted to ask, actually, let's sort of switch topics. What did you think about Caden's interaction with his daughter? Because that was very important in this film. There's several interactions.
Which one? The one where they meet?
So what about
cafe or the restaurant? Like, go ahead.
Let's start with which one was the restaurant? I'm thinking more of where he goes to where his daughter's working and he bangs on that wall, where he sees her nude.
Oh yeah, she's on the. See, I was thinking of the scene where like she's still little. And he's like, you should come back with me. Remember, he travels to go to where the Adele went. Remember?
I'm trying to refresh my memory on that. This film was also very long.
So he travels to Berlin, and then she talks to her. Oh no, it's not the daughter. The daughter's in the backdrop. He's talking to the woman that like supposedly
the lover or whatever. Right?
The lover, caregiver, and I think the daughter's just around. But like he's demanding his daughter back. So actually, you're right. I guess when he sees her as a kid in the beginning, and then then she's working as basically like a call girl, and then like at the hospital.
The call girl scene was weird because he realizes there's nothing he could do that his like daughter's life is already set. And I think he has a lot of regrets at that point.
Yeah, because he cared about.
I don't know. What did you think about that scene?
Yeah, I think with the relationship with the daughter, I think, again, it goes back to how, in the end of the day, the people we truly impact are the ones that, because most of us aren't going to become Alexander the Great. Mm-hmm. But the people
the ones within your inner circle.
Yeah, the people you interact with, like at work, with your friends or church, whatever social circles you're in, right? Because it's an old adage that I've heard on many YouTube channels and in general, right? People remember how you made them feel versus what you said, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's, we unfortunately only see the movie from the perspective of Caden, so we don't understand. We only see slices of her story. But every time she interacts with Caden, you can see that like, her relationship with her parents affected her greatly.
Sure.
And probably put her down a certain life path. Mm-hmm. And again, we can't see her story completely, but I think, that story, the scene with when he said, like he's basically crying, like for her to get like not,
to calm down, clothe herself, all that.
Yeah. And then the hospital scene, which we'll dig into, I think, I'm interested about your take, but I view it as kind of like you're still, everybody's a consequence of their actions. Mm-hmm. And I guess the bigger question goes back to free will. That's why this movie is so multifaceted. Free will and destiny, right? Like, because the daughter represents maybe like the argument for like it's destiny, right? Like when you have
I'm not so sure about that, but okay.
When you have, I mean, like my interpretation of the Olive, I think it's her character name, is that mm-hmm. like when you have like this parental baggage or historical baggage, like how much is it really out of your control to not, and like the degree of difficulty for you to get out of that cycle of, let's just say, psychological trauma is not that trivial. And so,
right, but a lot of it is where you put your energy towards. I don't think he put all that Caden put all that he could into his family, his daughter. I think it was always his focus is more on his being a good writer, director, rather than actually raising his kid.
No, he had a role. It's just that that's what they said, that the medium limits us, right? Because we don't see all of story. Right? There might have been other actions. Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on. I think my whole point with is you're assuming that if Caden had switched focus and if things had still turned out the way they did, then it's destiny. My whole point is I'm not so sure it would have been if Caden had if he had refocused where his energy should go towards and did all he could.
So let me ask a contrarian question. Could Caden even become that person if he had his own baggage, right? How big is his lineage? Maybe he has his traumas because of his own parents, his own.
Yeah, but I think we all do, but there's always more that you can do, and that's why I say, and I'm a big fan of, look, you need to go to therapy to deal with your own issues.
Yeah, I'm saying that sometimes the die is cast. I'm just saying this as a contrarian. I know I have my own personal beliefs on the subject, but
no, but
yeah.
I do agree. I think that you can't really be your full self until you deal with all of your issues, all your baggage, which is why personally I think most people should go to therapy.
Yeah, but maybe
my personal belief.
But maybe some people go to therapy because
to deal with their own traumas.
The die has been cast. They would go to therapy. Others will never go. Yeah.
Yes, but in the end, it is still up to you to do it. Right? You can control. I can decide to eat a banana or not. I'm not a full fan of this whole destiny ideology. No, there are certain things that are out of your control, which is where stoicism comes. Where some people focus on what is out of their control. I don't think that's healthy. You should focus on what is within your control.
But even maybe even the thought of you focusing on that you should only focus on what you control is something that, like,
and maybe we would have already been in World War III in an alternative reality. I mean, you could go down the what if rabbit hole forever. My whole point is you should focus on what you're able to control. In the end, you could say, okay, yeah, maybe everything's predetermined.
Yeah, maybe that very thought you had was predestined,
and maybe we're a simulation too. There's nothing we can do about that. I'm operating under certain assumptions.
It could be false. Audience, remember that.
This guy's just trolling now. Trollmaster 9000.
I'm in my element with this movie, dude. Yeah, when every opinion is valid, or any perspective is valid. Is there any right perspective? This movie was so good, dude, in many ways.
Wrong.
And I say this to somebody who doesn't have strong opinions about anything.
You have some of the strongest opinions of anybody I've ever met in my life.
For the sake of the plot.
Anyway. Well, we're getting into like this realm of like abstraction that's you can go down forever.
I think that's what.
Okay, so let's bring it back.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to the movie. I think the movie does this to you. Like, it makes you do this.
Yeah, I know.
Think that's the point.
I'm saying let's move on because we're gonna go down this forever. What did you think about that scene when he sees his daughter in the hospital?
I found that scene to be profound on many
levels.
Arguably
the most powerful to me.
Yeah, because I think, and this goes back to because we see the movie from Caden's perspective, right? Like,
yes, and I think that's the filtered lens that you were talking about.
Exactly, the filter lens, but also you can see in his mindset, because again, I give credit to Philip Seymour Hoffman of the acting, because you could see in his facial expression when he does and like emotionally like let go, give her what she wants, his daughter wants. He's expecting like
reciprocation.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm gonna be forgiven, I'm gonna be loved again, and she shuts him down. And I think
you don't deserve love. Basically,
that's so powerful. Yeah, it's so powerful
because he opened up and just got shattered.
Because like that's the risk of emotional vulnerability, right? Whether it's this situation or you're pursuing romantically or whatever.
I think that's what a lot of people fear, to open up.
Yeah, and then get like crushed and then feel like you're not loved, basically, because that's a powerful emotion. And you can see that it crushes him. That's where like it's subtle acting, because he doesn't say much, but it's like his face. I'm just like, that's top acting, dude. That's like, where's the Oscar? Because like I was just like, this is a great scene. And like, yeah, because it's also like how even the pace, right? You think for through 2 seconds that, oh, she's gonna say like, oh, thank you. No, she said, yeah, basically says like, oh, I can't do it. Like she and then she dies immediately. Yeah, and then she dies immediately, and it's like
there's no
it's just crazy.
What do you call it? No. There's no there's no closure. That's the word I'm looking for. Because you think for a brief moment he's going to get closure, and it shatters.
And then on a bigger picture level, my interpretation is that like in life, I think you and I are more aware of this, but I think for a lot of people, they think that right? It goes back to the denial of death, right? Like we all think that we're all going to die at like 80 and like we're going to die in our home. And like, it's like, even in like other, like we kind of like act like we'll get closure, but sometimes like people just drop out of your life, things happen, or you just God forbid, like there's a lightning strike and I get hit outside, like we always think that our stories are going to end like a book, right? Right. Because the power of stories, right? And I think that scene to me really resonated because I was just like, no, sometimes the stories don't end the way you think they're going to end. Life is unpredictable, a bit chaotic and random, But I'm curious what you got out of that scene because I know it's a scene that sticks out for a lot of people.
Well, it was just brutal. And I think part of why it was important where you're saying that, a lot of this, like what he's trying to touch upon is that everything that we see, is open air interpretation. It's your experience that is guiding that narrative of storytelling, right? And it's like, I did not catch that Caden was homosexual or he had an affair with a guy, right? And so that it's not until she explicitly says that, it's like, oh, snap. Okay, well, this is all being told through Caden's perspective, and there's a lot that we're sort of missing that is not being told through Caden's perspective that led to the demise of his family. And that's why I was saying earlier that he was selfish, right? Everything was all about himself and nothing was really about anybody else, right? That's even what happens in that other very powerful scene where I forgot the guy that plays him, the actor, he jumps off of the building.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing. But to rewind back what you just said, it just something clicked in my brain that like you're right. Like when in our lives, right? Like, we tend to view our life or even how we view the world through our perspective.
Through our lens.
That's the only way we can. And, obviously, we can't just rewind the clock like a normal story. Mm-hmm. When I was younger, and I think I still have this thought that like, if there is an afterlife, the only thing I actually personally want is not like nirvana or anything is kind of like to have the privilege of seeing all the perspectives that I came across, either people I don't even talk to anymore. Like, what happened to them, right? When I'm deep in my thoughts, like sometimes I do wonder, like, I used to play with this kid, like when I was living in Palo Alto. What happened to him? What was his story? Like, I'm a genuine curious person, but I'm always like, maybe like for all I know, that guy's story ended at like 20. Like, I don't even know, right?
We don't know.
I hope not, but like, you just don't know, right? And so I think that speaks to that scene of like, we only get a filtered view because, we're only really, the story is really Caden's story, right? What is his interpretation and what is his, like we feel his pain at times, but we also are like, wait, this doesn't really make sense. Like, oh, you've been omitting things from us, right? It's like an imperfect story, right? But that's true in any case, right? If you write your own autobiography starting tomorrow, you're going to do it based off your memories. And look, we all know it's proven in science, right? That like memory is fallible, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we repress things. Sometimes we misremember details.
That's why they say even like eyewitness accounts aren't very reliable.
Exactly. Right. Some people may look the same. So yeah, that's a good call out. So it's, this movie,
So it touches upon so much. So let's, since I brought that scene up, because I also really like that scene because it was wild and it was so surreal is how I would describe that scene of when the actor that plays him jumps off the building within the warehouse. Why did that happen, or what were they trying to get across?
Well, I'm curious to see your thoughts on it because, like, I think you can go anywhere and kind of not anywhere, but you can go to a lot of places with that.
It was a lot, man. I mean, it just speaks to the incredible selfishness of Caden, right? And is weird, right? Because in order to play the actor to play Caden, he was it was almost like that was his subconscious. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was just like play within a play was just so bizarre. Yeah, it was almost as if it was self-conscious because he knew Caden better than Caden knew Caden, in a way, right? And so I don't know if that was just a part of him dying or that it was just his own self-destructive nature that's what ended up killing himself, or his own decisions were killing himself. I don't know. Like, you can go any which way with this.
I think we're slightly aligned. I did view it. So the context here for the audience is that this character, when he first comes across Caden, he kind of tells him that he's been following him forever, right? Like he's just been stalking him. Mm-hmm. And so I think you're on the, like, if I were to put money, I think you're on the money on it's to represent sort of the subconscious, the second, like the other perspective that you don't think like consciously about.
It's sort of the shadow. Bringing it back to Jungian psychology, it's kind of like the shadow.
Yeah. So when he jumps, I deep down think that like that's what Caden wants to do. I think throughout the movie you see that he toys with the idea of killing himself, I think death, and I think and many times he hits that point. But obviously, going, crossing the red line is more difficult than like contemplating it, right? And I think like deep down, that's what he wants. And again, when we get to the ending, the only time he feels at peace is the ending. If you think about it, when he lets go and accepts death, and we'll get to that scene. That's where we'll wrap up probably. So I mean, how I interpreted throughout the movie that his character was like, yeah, like. But then what was interesting is that they made it a chain, right? Like he had also a shadow. So like, does your subconscious have a shadow and another shadow? Like you can go like down this infinite loop, and so it's because like you said, it was a play within a play. Even the buildings represent this, like the set, right? It's like it's like bizarre, right?
Surreal is how I would describe it.
Yeah, surreal. That's a great word. Yeah, it's super. I think it's like it's true. It's a thought experiment, right? Does your subconscious have a subconscious or something behind that? It's like you can go down this rabbit hole for infinity, and I like going down rabbit holes. But continue.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean that's pretty much where I was at. Where I just realized I was like, oh shoot, that's his subconscious for sure, because otherwise it doesn't quite make sense. And really, how a lot of his decisions leads to sort of the self-destructive nature, and probably why he toys with the idea of suicide. Go ahead.
No, I have another. I want to ask you about a scene, but
go ahead.
So you know how we see the Adele in the beginning, and then we don't really see her again, but Kaden finds her apartment and
his ex-wife, right?
Yeah, and cleans it. What did you think of that? I will say that's one of the parts that really confused me. Like I was just like,
it was bizarre. I think it was toying into some delusion of himself, or because you're not even sure if that's. Like some of it felt very much like schizophrenia in certain aspects. So I don't know if that actually happened, or maybe that's sort of the schizophrenic nature of Caden's mind as well.
It seemed like delusional, right? Like
delusion.
Right?
Yeah.
I
think we do get all. Speaking of someone we knew from way back when with delusion. I think it's someone we went to high school with who sort of had a deluded idea. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't want to call anybody out.
We can talk off the road.
Yeah, we can talk. But
after.
Yeah, I think sometimes we sort of create this reality or within our minds. It's not necessarily what is happening in real life.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure. I'm sure there was more to it than I'm probably just glossing over that scene or why that was included, but. That's pretty much what I got out of it because it was pretty confusing.
Yeah, I mean, you much better than me. I would say that's one of the parts of the movie where I myself, even though I like having some opinions and answers, I was kind of like perplexed. Like I was just like, I couldn't fit it.
And plus then he keeps going back later on and then it's slightly different. And then you have the recording. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, to me, I will admit, like, I don't have a clear cut. Like, I don't really understand where it fit in the narrative and the story.
I'm not so sure either. I mean, there's a lot that I'm probably missing from this movie.
No, it's impossible to truly understand this movie.
To get everything out of it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to touch upon? Probably the ending, I would imagine.
We'll get there. We got the daughter. We got the play.
Hazel, we touched upon.
Oh, what did you think when Kaden was jealous of Hazel kind of being like flirty with his subconscious, as you've heard it earlier? There was a lot to unpack there. Right? He sees them talking and having a friendly time.
I mean, now that I kind of just realized that self-conscious is always like sort of going through my thought process.
Is she in love with him or the subconscious?
Yeah.
I love how you just had this profound moment that you're like, oh my God, I had an epiphany.
Well, no, it's just more confusion, right? Because that's like very deep. I'm not so sure.
I didn't have an answer either because it's like maybe she's in love with both of them. She loves both that that subtle side of him that he just doesn't show, and maybe who he is every day. Like maybe that's the definition of true love.
Bro, I don't know. You have way more of an idea than I do on that.
I mean, I'm speculating. I just couldn't. That's
so meta. That's like wild.
I know. I'm meta. So. Everybody should read about the metaverse too. By the way, I'm going to do a plug for that. Anyways, the
metaverse. Okay.
But yeah, I that was the best guess I had. It's like this movie has a lot of psychology in it, and that's not one of the places I'm like a super expert in.
Gotta read more Jung, bro.
It's on the long list.
It should be at the top of your list.
Well, you already know what's coming up on my list, so
I don't know if I want to know, but okay. But anyway, do you want to get to the ending scene, or is there anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying. While I was talking, I'm trying to think of all the things that like really piqued.
I mean, there were a lot of scenes.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of the ones that really resonated with me or really clicked with me. So that was one of them because I found that interesting with the whole like she really was falling for the other guy, like the other Caden, you know. So I was curious about what you thought about that represented. But no, we talked about the daughter.
I mean, there was also the actress that he had a kid with and married, but then left, but then kind of came back. That was a weird sequence too.
That was a weird sequence. It was like he had like basically another family, and
a lot of this was kind of out of order too, which confused the heck out of me as well.
Yeah. I forgot. I totally forgot about like the other actress he was with, and like, but I felt like always that it seemed like it was his replacement for Hazel.
Maybe. I mean, it almost felt like she was a rebound.
Yeah, then had the kid, and then like the kid, like, yeah,
then she quits. She quits from the actual acting because he does something. I can't remember what.
Yeah, I forgot too.
Man, there's so much.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. Like it's she does like the daughter. Also, he doesn't have like a relationship with that kid either.
Nope.
But yeah, I forgot that he had like the whole second kid and family basically. It was important, but it's like, yeah, there's just a lot to dig in here. So yeah, we'll get to
we can talk about this for like another 3 hours.
Yeah. I will say that we can probably like wrap up with the ending and then like some long monologues for myself. But
sure. Well, why don't we go with the ending scene? So because you got way more out of it than I did.
Yeah.
So you go ahead.
If you rewatch that ending scene, so if you rewatch the beginning and the ending scene, you'll actually see that they're tied together basically.
Okay. I can't remember the beginning scene.
It's like this is like a cliche in like a lot of religions anyways, right? The birth and death are very intertwined, right?
Life and birth.
The beginning is the end, you know, the alpha and the omega kind of stuff. And I think like that last line was like amazing, right? Just die. And I think it's just like at the end, like, you know, we just die, right? Like Caden needed to die too, and so will we one day. And I think
is that also Caden just accepting death?
I think it's also Caden accepting death. That's a good point. But this is something that I know I've thought about, and this is why like I think I could really I could really talk to Coffin for hours. Is that like if you really think about it, we spend most of our time, like our existence, like you and I are you like both of our existences, we spend it more time being like not born or dead, right? All the history that we know of, at least, let's go even beyond like human history, right? Like, you know, dinosaurs, Big Bang, right? And then when we die one day, there will be, even when humans don't exist, there will be, until the end of the universe, you know, it will continue to that point, right? So in our life, you know, we're only here for like the most minute fraction of a fraction of like, I don't know, whatever. Of like how like, you know, small you want to get. But basically, we're here for basically nothing. And yet we like have these grandiose, like, oh, I need to have my magma output, like the, you know,
basically like, none of it matters is what
you're saying. It's like, there's a famous like book, and it's I think Carl Sagan, you know, legendary scientist. He said once, and when he has this, I think it's this whole monologue, it's called like the blue dot. And he basically says like, you know, people have been trying to conquer, you know, basically Earth forever. And yet it's this blue dot. It's the same idea, right? But yet this blue dot, this universe, right? Or this whatever. And like, it's the same thing with this concept of like this film. And I think it's trying to explore is that like, you know, we are alive for like, we think it's, like I said, it's forever. But really, if you think about it on the grand scale of not human history, just history of the universe, it's nothing. It's nothing. Even humans haven't been around that long, right? And so we like, yeah, you know, well, yeah, I'm having some epiphanies myself, dude. Oh my God. You know, instead of like, oh my God, dude.
All right, go ahead.
But instead of like, what's the term like, instead of like, being so worried, so like careful about everything, like you should just live. So that was one of the things I got out of this film, is that Caden, his biggest failing is that he looked at the wrong things in life, right?
Sure.
He didn't, he should have been a better parent. He should have done what Candide says, like,
Things that matter in life.
yeah, can't cultivate your garden. You have this small garden, which is basically your life, and you can build a nice garden. And then if you die, you die. And then, okay, the garden might get destroyed, but you'll be happy in that moment. When you start thinking that you're going to build empire, money, legacy, you're going to be like Jeff
I got to have
Bezos.
all the nice cars. I got to flex on the gram on the daily.
Yeah, I got to, okay, dude. I got to flex on the gram, and I got to show people their lives are shit and mine's amazing. Yeah. You end up in a dark path. And I think
I don't even know what the dark path. It's just a path that's not fulfilling.
Yeah, that's what I view as a dark path. But yeah, like, so yeah,
it's
so
empty. It's empty. I think we know a couple people with some empty lifestyles too.
And so I will say that like the ending hit me, because I think you see that like Caden in the end accepted death, but he also had to accept that he lived an empty life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again,
I like how you didn't respond to my comment though.
Which comment?
When I said we know some people with some empty lifestyles.
Well, that's off the record. Go ahead. Off the record. But it's I think we're all victims of this, right? Like, sure. we tend to overthink things. We tend to worry about things that, if you ask yourself, like, think about this. Like, I always do this thought experiment, even though I don't fall through on my own advice. If you go back to like 15 years and you think about the things you were worried about then, and you look at your life now, you mean, I have the same feeling probably you do. Like, what was I worried about? Why did I think this was such a big deal? Like, in life, that was just a pebble, right? And I think in the universe, you could view it that way too, that like, it's just a pebble, Right. And I think Caden's failing, and I think this is what Kaufman is getting at, is that Caden to me represents the modern man. Like, I need to get the most money. I need to have
legacy.
I need to have legacy, even though I say this all the time, but we'll get into that later. We need to have legacy.
Depends what you mean by legacy.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean? Like, legacy, like, I need to have like the magna opus work he's doing, right? I need to have something that passes my time, because in the end, I can't keep recommending that book enough. Like, in the end, that book also talks about how, like, no matter if it's family genes or the legacy of ideas or whatever buildings, subconsciously we're obsessed with outliving our lives, in some form, because I think subconsciously we understand that death,
being eternal, it's almost like you're trying to be God in a way that you never die, but you'll never truly be like that.
Exactly, you die, right? And to me, that's what really like kicked in with the ending, that birth and death are connected. We spend most of our existence either not being born yet or dead. And also, we have to accept what will be, like the final step. Like, we can't deny ourselves. Basically, like, obviously be responsible, but don't have regrets that you didn't, do something because you were worried about XYZ, when in 100 years nobody's gonna care about XYZ. Nobody in the world is going to care about like, oh, you were worried about your presentation. Like, okay, you do your best, but if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like, you're not a terrible person. You're not a failure, right? I think that's what Caden was also struggling with, right? Like, oh, I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to be like, I'm a great artist. I'm a savant. Going back to our beginning comments, right? So yeah, that was like one of my long-winded answers before we get into final thoughts and ratings. But what did you think of the ending?
I mean, yeah. At a surface level, I thought it was just Caden finally accepting death, right? Or at least it's kind of like his subconscious allowing him to basically die. But in the end, I think he was just I think he finally realized that all he was living for was just not necessarily worth living anymore. Because he never was able to pull off the play. Everyone had sort of died. And it was kind of like, after all, it was kind of like, what's the point? Because his life was pretty empty.
Yep.
It's really sad. But yeah, I think at a bigger level, I think he was sort of talking about how a lot of people sort of live like Caden does.
Yep. I think 95%. I think most people in our modern, like our world in general, live like Caden.
Yeah. Whereas like you're not focused on the right things. I think
Exactly.
it's like what he was talking about. But anyway, yeah, we can. I mean, you went on your long tirade, so there's no need for me to rehash it more than that. So yeah, let's get into ratings and final thoughts. I'll let you go first.
No, you go first.
No. I'll let you because I picked this film, so I'll go last.
Okay. I want to have another long monologue, but okay, I'll do
Go
it
ahead.
now.
You can have the longest monologue you want.
Yeah. So this film. So I'll admit this because I admitted this to you off the record. This is a film that like when I finished watching it, I had tears in my eyes because I couldn't believe how profound it was. And I don't usually cry during movies, so it shows you. And it's because like there was a lot of moments that like so the reason it's not a 10 out of 10 for me is because there's problems with this movie. It's kind of confusing. It's also some scenes are just dropped in. Other scenes, like you said, doesn't happen in order, which is fine. You can have a non-linear movie.
I mean, what was it? Memento was
Yeah.
not all in order, and yet it's still tied together.
Yeah, this is like you could tell like it's like sporadic, and I think he was going for that, but I think there's a trade-off. Like any artist knows that like there's trade-offs, right? So like going for this style is okay. It's like I'm not gonna forget this movie, but also like okay, either keep like make it a 3-hour movie or cut some stuff out. Like that's my whole point. And so, but I will say that like this film, there were parts of this film, not the whole film, but like certain scenes, certain lines, certain sequences that really clicked in my brain. And I think it can, and I think for a lot of people who watch this movie, it probably did too. But I think for a lot of people, it meant it was like talking to a wall. Like it couldn't enter the mind, because I think a lot of people, and I think Coffin was getting at this, and I saw some interviews that like a lot of people, they don't think about life or other things as deeply as he does, and they're like, it's not going to be a movie for them because
Right.
they're going to be like, this movie doesn't make sense. There's just random lines. Why was this scene with the
Why
daughter?
was this included?
Yeah, what's going on? What do you mean? What does this ending even mean? Like, what is like? And I think that's why I think that if I watched this movie like 10 years ago, I would have been like confused as hell too. I would have been like, this is 4 out of 10 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've done so much reading and so much like deep thinking that I'm like, there was enough of this I could understand where I was like, okay, like this is going beyond the superficial. Maybe too abstract, you could argue. There's an argument for great art is like when it's realistic enough for anybody to really connect. I would argue Burning was that kind of film where you don't have to be like a savant and all these niche areas and still really see the world.
Really get it all out.
Yeah.
Get all you could out of it.
Yeah. So that's why I think in the end I had to dock a little bit. But personally, like, is this a movie that I enjoyed watching and thinking about, and like it really challenged some of my ideas or reaffirmed some of them? Definitely. And I think my last point before I get into my score is that this film, and I think Caden specifically, represents what I consider to be the anxiety of the modernity, that we are like, we don't really know, like we're told like a certain mythology that's become like very toxic, like, get the bag, get the girl, level up, and all the stuff that I usually say on a joking side. But in reality, it's all superficial and empty. And like
when you tendies,
when you look back on your life, will you really look at like you were in a villa, like drinking caviar and wine, or will you remember the friendships? Okay, dude, I'm talking. Will you remember the friendships, the human reactions, the human relationships with your peers, your coworkers, your family, those moments more, right? It's like I go back to what I said earlier, right? People remember how you feel versus what you said or did, right? Like there's so many things that I don't remember doing. I have to really think back. And even then I know my memory is not perfect, but I remember like my happy moments, my moments where I was like in bliss, or things
it's oftentimes the little things.
Yeah. And, I think this movie is Kaufman's way of saying that like, we're becoming trapped in our own imaginations, and we're not really interacting with the world. And we're also so scared of, it's going back to this thing I learned in the 90s, the hedgehog's dilemma. We're so afraid of, like, as much as we have the potential to connect with people, we also could hurt each other. And that's what we're afraid of too.
Right.
The hurt. Right. And yeah, look up the hedgehog's dilemma. It's a good one. And so, yeah, my rating is a 9 out of 10. I consider this movie to be an imperfect masterpiece. That's the perfect word for it. So,
yeah, I think like you said earlier, it could have added like probably at plus or minus a half an hour, it could have like made things either more concise or expanded on a couple other things, and you probably would have been more okay with some of the down pitfalls of the film. This is, I will say, it was a very ambitious film. This would have been hard for anybody to try to direct, even though like the most perfect director, I think, would have struggled trying to actually put this like vision into like a film like masterpiece. I think Kaufman did as best he could. His mind is just wild where it goes in many different directions and what he tries to do. I think part of that, it was just he tried tackling so much with this movie that it's almost like he was trying to explain every like psychological aspect within life. That's what it seemed like he was trying to do with this in this film, and some of it like I caught. A lot of it probably just went over my head, or I just didn't pick up on. And so I'll give him credit for the attempt and the ambition of this film. But I think that part of making great film is great art is that it can try to be accessible to everybody. And I think within Kaufman, he just didn't care if you got it or you didn't, or like it just went completely over your head. And I do have some issues with that. Like when we've reviewed other great films like Burning, like you have to try to make art that could be accessible to your audience. At least that's how I sort of feel. And I think a lot, like we weren't even able to get a lot, and we tend to watch a lot of films that try to touch upon deeper meanings. And we were struggling with this quite a bit, I would say. I don't know if you felt that way, Chris, but I think because of the convolutedness in certain aspects of the film, it kind of lost me at times. And it's not that it was just one or two instances. Like quite a few times, I'm like, well, and I'm trying to think. I was like, what's the deal? What are you trying to get at, Kaufman? I was like, you can't even get like give your audience a little nugget of where you're trying to go with this. And so that was sort of my issues. Is at times I felt like it was either lost or some scenes could have been like cut out. And I think that convolutedness bugged me more than it did you. Like I think sort of the meta meanings like really pushed this film above like above where you would normally rank films that were this convoluted, Chris. At least that's sort of what I've been gathering as we've been going along. So for me, I think the confusion is really what pushed the film down in a way to me. So I'd give this film an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I think it's fair points. Like I think this film has. I think it's not that accessible.
I don't. Kaufman was kind of like he has this artsy frame of like whether you get it or not, that's irrelevant to me, or whether you appreciate it. And he's like, I'm going to do what I want to do, which is cool, but then it leaves your audience really confused at times. It's like you should. I would have liked a little more clarity in certain aspects.
Yeah, and I think like to your point, like he also made that movie. I'm thinking of ending things. I was left confused, and I didn't.
Oh, we both of us did not understand what was going on in the slightest. Yeah. Some of the monologues in that movie, though, fantastic.
Yeah, that's true. I will say that even the acting was good. What I will say is that like I think the best work he's been affiliated with is being John Malkovich, and you can tell when you have he's just a writer. He probably gets that healthy pushback of like, hey, we need to flesh this out. Because that movie was meta too, but like it flowed like really
but it was so good.
And I think when Kaufman is in full control, it's like you get that it's that risk reward factor, right? It's like that great coach is in full control, right? You either get like a masterpiece or
it falls apart very quickly.
Yeah, or like it's a bit like, and I think this is why I consider it so far. I haven't seen all his direct like where he's full control, but this is the best one I've seen so far where when he's in full control, because I think it ends up being really like I'm thinking of ending things. Like he's in his own head a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Like I could see both perspectives. I think for me, I think my monologue covered it, and I'm still objective enough not to give it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah. The one thing, and I'm sorry we didn't touch upon it. Another very important scene was the funeral scene. But I mean, I think the monologue that they give within that scene speaks for itself. I don't think we really need to touch upon it.
Yeah, that funeral scene, it's on YouTube too, so you can.
Yeah, you can watch that. It was a great scene. I will say that.
Yeah. It kind of ties also with all the topics we've talked about. I think this movie is more about generating conversation than really saying like, "Oh, this specific scene, did you like the monologue?" Like, monologues are important, but I think Kaufman, like always, is just trying to get you to think.
Sure. Anyway, yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. We touched upon pretty much everything we wanted to. So anyway, if you liked our commentary on this film, please like and subscribe to our channel. And yeah, stay tuned. Next week, which film are we going to be reviewing? I gotta
Diner.
Yeah, so 1982 film Diner. So it's definitely a big change of pace from this film. Anyway, so yeah, please like and subscribe to our channel.
I would argue our next batches are big changes of pace from this film. So.
Oh yeah, 100%. Not nearly as meta, but anyway, stay tuned for next week. Bye.
But.